Hello everybody, hope you're all well in these difficult times that we're having. I'm sure like me you're itching to get out. Well, the pattern I'm going to do today is something that I've been playing about with, and it was a result of a YouTube video I saw of a midge pupa getting to the point of hatching out, and I thought I'll try and take a few patterns and sort of put my own little slant on it. So we're going to be using a buzzer hook. I'm using a Kamasan B100. I'm just going to take the barb off, or compress the barb. Yep. Put that in the vise. And then I'm using UTC black 70 denier. I'll just put on a few turns to hold in position, and then I'm going to put in the material to emulate a shuck, and this is I'm using this crinkle Zelon because it's quite fine, it's quite lightweight, and I'm just going to put a small amount on, just putting it on top of the shank and binding it down under a bit of tension to get the body as flat as we can. That's going all the way down to the bend. Don't worry too much about being too fastidious about the touching turns, because we're going to be going back. And then I'll just remove that bit of waste, and then we're going to tie in a bit of flexi floss for the ribbing. So I'll just bind it in fairly tight, then under a bit of tension just pull it down, wind the thread over, again trying to keep fairly touching turns, but we will be going back with the thread so we can fill in any gaps. So this goes all the way down to where we tied it, or finished tying in the shuck material, binding those down. And then this pattern has actually got a fine rib wire in red, and this is Flybox Micro Red. So I'll just catch that in. Oops. And then the final material is some couple of strands of pheasant tail, cock pheasant tail, dyed black, and this will just give us an impression of the gills, which you'll see in the natural that go along the body. So I'll catch those in, and then bind everything down. As I say, just fill in the gaps as you go. Get to the thorax position when we can just remove those materials. I'm just going to run my thread out the way, and then just taking the two pheasant tail fibres just fairly carefully. Wind them down or up in sort of fairly open turns. These are going to be overbound by the flexi floss. Some of it will get buried, but the idea is to try and emulate the breather's gill. I'll tie that off. Now we want to tie the flexi floss through, just move that out of the way. And we're getting a little bit of pressure to start with on the flexi floss, and sort of open spirals, and as you come up just leave off the tension a little bit just to get those ribs or segments a little bit wider. Take it through to the thorax position again where we tie it off. Just bear in mind with the flexi floss that it has a habit of springing back on you, so make sure you are very robust in your tying off. Right, now with ribs we would normally go in the opposite direction, but what I want to try and do is to put this rib that goes alongside the flexi floss that we put in, and this is a similar principle to the grey boy buzzer. That sort of gives a little bit of an impression of a bit of hemoglobin in the fly or the pupa. So, and then remove that. Now this pattern has got a plastozote ether foam post, and I'm using 5mm ether foam, and I'm going to put that on. This will tie in and create slightly bulkier bit of the thorax, but I want to be, it's too far forward, I don't want to be too far over the eye, so I'll take that off. Just remove a little bit of that tip, otherwise it will be too long, so place it over there. Let's see how we're doing. No, still a bit. Okay, yep. So just leave yourself a little bit of a space at the eye, so we can then tie off the hackle, which we will then put on next. I'm just going to bind a little bit underneath there to keep it fairly rigid, and then compress as much of that tag of plastozote as you can, so that the thorax doesn't end up too big and bulky. Right, the next material to tie in is a grizzle cock hackle. Just removing a little bit of the fibres that I don't need to allow a bit of stalk. and I'm going to be tying it concave side up so that when the fibres are tied they'll be sticking up as opposed to sticking down, so that the fly sits lower in the water. So I'm just tying that in up against the post, and then continue to bind the stalk down and remove. So we're coming back to where we're going to tie in some wing buds, and these are a sunburst goose biots, which will represent the wing cases of the hatching insect. So remember when we tied in the jungle cock substitute, that's what I use these for. I've just trimmed off a little bit of the tip so that I haven't got too much material showing, and then I'm going to tie two in slightly differently to the way we did the wing buds on the jungle cock substitute, because these are going to be tied in underneath the shank. It's not in the right position. Let's trim another one. Tie those together. What I want to do is get those slightly underneath the thorax position. There we go. And then finally a little bit of dubbing, and I'm going to be using some SLF Davy Wotton's blend, and this is blend 16, which is midge pupa blend. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but it has got just a tiny fleck of red in the material. So I don't want very much, it's just enough to put a bit of colour onto the thread so that we can bind down over the remnants of the material. It just helps to trap a little bit of air in when you're aerolizing the flyer, and it just gives it that little bit of natural look, because the fly, when it pumps the oxygen out of the body to start the process of pupation or point of eclusion, you get a little bit of a bubble effect. So I'm just going to bind down fairly small thorax, not up right up against the post, just removing the last bits. And then I'm going to tie the two wing buds forward. What I'd like to do is to try and tie these in together. And making sure that both of those either side. tie them fairly tight, and then you can then remove the stubs of the goose bites, and I'm using a scalpel here just to remove and then with the hackle I'm going to be winding 3 or 4 turns, and I'm going to be trying to get underneath each turn as best I can. So that helps to tighten the post up. I'll get one more turn in there, and then try and get a little bit of thread underneath if we can. I appreciate there's going to be a few fibres that are going to sit below. Don't worry too much because they could always be trimmed afterwards. And then finally pull everything back and get as many of those fibres back as you can, so that we can wind ahead. And finally a little bit of varnish. Just a little tip that I picked up from John Reed. Most varnish bottles have got this little well at the bottom of it. If you shake the bottle and then take the lid off, then you just get a small deposit of varnish. It just saves getting too much varnish over your dyeing needle. Remember to put the lid back on. Okay, and then we'll whip finish underneath. Oh. Easier said than done. Just going to remove the thread and take the hackle off. Again, just using a scalpel. I'm going to try and encourage all those fibres up, those that I've got trapped in underneath. And just remove those. Try and get those to sit the fly as low as possible on the water. And then finally leave yourself about 5 ml of foam, so it acts as a floatant and a good sighter. And then finally, if you get yourself organised enough, you've got to trim the shuck just about the length of the body, and that's just going to sit in just below the surface and hopefully move about a bit, give it a little bit of movement, and then And finally, I'm just going to put a small amount of silicone floatant on the hackle and the thorax, just so that it sits in the film with the body below it. Okay, slightly challenging fly, but I don't know what you think, but I think it looks quite an effective pattern. If you watch the video on YouTube, you will see that the coloration of the segmentation is quite marked, and I think that white flexi floss does the job. Okay, I hope you're going to have a go at this one. It's a challenging fly, and hopefully by the time we are allowed out on the water, this one might be quite an effective pattern. Okay, keep well and see you next time.